Welcome, everybody. Hello. Thanks for being here. Coming at you live from New York. This is Spirit Matters, your daily Bhakti Center podcast. A little spiritual check-in to check in with each other and just make sure that we're doing okay. I have a little dose of spirit with us. Yesterday, I was reading this verse from Bhagavad Gita, 5th chapter, verse 17, and this idea of refuge came out. Not refuse, like garbage, but refuge, like where you take shelter. I think we read this verse yesterday, right? And he said, when one's mind, intelligence, faith, and refuge are all fixed in that supreme, then one becomes fully cleansed of misgivings through complete knowledge and thus proceeds straight on the path of liberation. When one's intelligence, mind, faith, and refuge are all fixed in the supreme, then one becomes fully cleansed of misgivings through complete knowledge and thus proceeds straight on the path of liberation. And this Sanskrit term in this is tatparayana, who have completely taken shelter. So we use this word in Sanskrit. Sometimes we have this word ashraya, means shelter. We even use the word ashram. I went to stay in an ashram. Ashram literally means a place of shelter. And the various stages of spiritual life in Vedic culture are known as ashrams. You have the brahmachari ashram, which is like monk student life. Then you have grihasta ashram, which literally grihasta means situated in a home. Sta means situated, like stan, stable, like Rajasthan and Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan and Pakistan, like the place of griha, a home. And so meaning that you're situated in a home, but you make your home a place of shelter. How do you make your place of home a shelter? You spiritualize it by making it a temple, and you making your relationships spiritualize it. This is not my wife, my husband, my boyfriend, my girlfriend, my home, my kids, my blah, 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 blah. But this is a place of shelter where I spiritualize my home and turn it into a temple. That's a whole other conversation for another day. But these various ashram stages of life, meaning place of shelter. And so the whole concept of spiritual life in bhakti and in Vedic culture and yoga philosophy is, where are we taking shelter? Where are we taking shelter? And that's my prelude. I'm not just jumping right into it, but I'm trying to make us give a prelude here about questioning, where are we taking shelter? And this podcast, as well as everything we do at the Bhakti Center, is to try to give us a little reset into our day, to have some contact with spirit. Because the reality is, life is hard, isn't it? Life is hard. Anybody agree, disagree? Can we do a quick Instagram poll? Life is hard. Okay, I got a thumbs up from Dana K. I got 2 thumbs up from Kimberly, Baldevi, Sydney. Someone's giving me 3 thumbs up. How do I even have 3 thumbs? But I think that life is hard, and we're constantly in a place of wondering, where can I take shelter? And what does it mean to take shelter? It means, where am I going for comfort, for relief, for guidance, to be lifted up, to be held? And there's so many empty promises in the world regarding where to go, whether it's in entertainment, whether it's in drugs, whether it's in food, whether it's in relationship, whether it's in shopping. In so many ways, the addictions that we face are our unsuccessful solutions towards feelings of disconnection, because the soul's natural constitutional position is Satchit Ananda, is to be situated in our eternal cognizant position of love and joy expressed through service and relationship with the divine. And when I'm outside of that, I'm searching for some coping mechanism that I end up diving into in the material world. And so we're retraining our mind, we're rewiring our mind in a way to lean back towards spirit, to find spiritual truth. And it's not always easy, and it's not always intuitive, but we have to initially rewire our mind to do so. And that practice is called sadhana, the disciplined action every day to make sure that there's some contact with spirit in my life. And so we do that through our meditation, through japa, through chanting, through kirtan, through mantra, having spiritual sound vibration. Because we have a, excuse me, we have a lot of, there's a lot of sound vibrations washing over our consciousness constantly, right? This is a sound vibration. The sound of my raspy toad-like voice is a vibration coming through into your brain right now, for better or worse. But sound vibrations are constantly being whispered and screamed into our mind. There's one recollection of Caesar Julius Caesar, who used to go on his campaigns, and he was so, and he would go in throughout towns, and there would just be like cheers, and they were treated like a god. And he would employ one servant to ride on his chariot and whisper in his ear, "You're only a man. You're only a man. You're only a man," because he knew that if that the pride of emperorship was downfall. He saw his predecessors in so many ways. And granted, because it's like a drug, when we have fame and we have adoration and we have recognition and we have distinction. It was Kevin Hart, who was on a podcast with Jay Shetty, who said that's the greatest drug, more than cocaine, more than heroin, more than alcohol, more than sex, more than any other drug, the drug of fame. Because it gives me a sense of importance. It gives me that sense of like, oh my God, I actually do matter. I do belong. I do have a place in the world. But it's based off of a false sense of self. It's based on a false identity that's temporary, and therefore it's mixed with crippling anxiety. And we don't know who we are when it goes away. And so he would have this sound vibration, because the sound vibration of everybody cheering and saying you're the best, it creates a certain impression in the brain, in the mind, in the consciousness. So he would have a different sound vibration to balance that out, to try to bring him back to reality, to keep him centered, to keep him grounded. And so we have sound vibrations coming into our consciousness constantly. And those sound vibrations are carrying modes of nature influencing us. And so part of sadhana is starting to pay attention to, what are the sound vibrations that I am inviting into my consciousness on a regular basis? What am I consuming in my consciousness? So we have our meditation, our japa, our mantra, and we also have what we're reading and what we're consuming through making sure we have some truth in our life. Sat, the word sat is in Sanskrit, refers to eternal and also refers to real. And so what is truth? Where am I bringing truth into my life? So we have to have some contact with spiritual literature. And for us here at the Bhakti Center and Spirit Matters, we bring in the Bhagavad Gita, the song of God, the eternal calling of divinity back to us. And so wherever you are, wherever your life looks like, however challenging your life circumstances are, I urge you, I implore you, this is your public service announcement. I know that sometimes it's so hard and it's so easy to push the easy buttons. As Glennon Doyle will say, we push the easy buttons of just finding like, I just need some relief. Like social media is just literally a way to just completely remove my mind from presence, right? Take my mind away from whatever I'm feeling and experiencing right now and just catapult me somewhere else, because I want to be anywhere other than in my life right now. So let me watch a movie, let me watch TV, let me look at the news, let me scroll on social media, let me watch a sports game, to just get caught up in somebody else's life, because the presence of my life is so hard. And so if we can resist some of those easy buttons, and instead, when life gets really, really, really hard, let me lean into truth. Let me lean towards my higher power. Let me find something that's not just empty calories and a sugar rush by just shoving a donut in my mouth that makes me feel better. But at the end of the day, it's just like, ugh, why did I do that? By drinking, by consuming a drink that's going to give me a buzz and a headache the next morning. Granted, we struggle with these things, but there's a part of us that knows that's just like, this isn't real shelter. And so I may not be able to completely eradicate that all at once, but can I at least start to add just a little bit of faith and refuge in something higher and greater than myself that I know is stable and that I know ultimately is going to be for my greater good. Bhagavad Gita says as much in I think it's in the 18th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Let me pull this up here. Talks about, there it is, 1837. So the Bhagavad Gita mentions that there are three modes of material nature and the different kinds of happiness that exists according to the material nature. He says that in the beginning, which may be like poison, but that at the end is just like nectar, and which awakens one to self-realization, is said to be happiness in the mode of goodness. That happiness was derived, which contact from the senses with their sense object, and which appears like nectar at first, but poison at the end, is said to be of the nature of passion. And that happiness which binds one to that happiness which is blind to self-realization, which is delusion from beginning to end, and which arises from sleep, laziness, and illusion, is said to be of the nature of ignorance. So there are things in our life which feel uncomfortable in the beginning, but if we stay the steady course, you realize that it actually is for our greater good, and we feel uplifted, we feel unburdened, we feel relieved, we feel at the end. And there are things that feel great in the beginning, feels like a rush, it feels like a quick fix, but it leaves us empty at the end of it. Leaves me wanting for more, leaves me feeling more drained, that I feel more anxious, I feel more depressed, I feel more empty. And I get in this loop of needing more of it, but then feeling more drained at the end. It's the mode of passion. And there are things that are just diluting from beginning to end, in the mode of ignorance. And so learning to take shelter in our spiritual practice, in spiritual, in spirit, in contact with higher power through our meditation, through our mantra. In bhakti, we encourage mantra through the practice of japa, chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, the names of Krishna, the names of Govinda, the names of Sham Sundar, which are unlimited, like the names of the sun, which although there are many, they refer to the same shining star in the sky. Or just through contact with spiritual literature. Like, can I open up a book and just be like, you know what? My mind is running 1,000,000 miles a minute right now. And I'm on all of these turbo scenarios. If I can borrow a term from our friends Raghunath and Kastuba over at Wisdom of the Sages, these turbo scenarios that just poison our mind of just like, what are they thinking of me? Well, this must be what they intended. We get into people's, a small little action takes place, and all of a sudden I'm wrapped around what I think their intention is and what I think it says about me, and what the consequences are, and what this means for my career and for my relationships now, and blah, 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 blah. And I get wrapped up in all these scenarios in my head. And rather than, let me just like suspend all of that and just enter into a moment of prayer, enter into a moment of meditation, enter into a moment of presence, enter in a moment of like, let me just open up the Bhagavad Gita and read a verse and read it with openness. Maybe I just do that for 1 minute or 2 minutes or 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And I make that a daily commitment. You know what? I'm just going to have 5 minutes of my day where I'm just going to have this spiritual literature coming into my life. And so that's why we're here. Back to this verse, the 5th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, verse 17. When one's mind, faith, refuge, when one's intelligence, mind, faith, and refuge are all fixed in the Supreme. One's intelligence. Krishna mentions at the end of the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, this hierarchy of material faculties which we've been given. He says that the working senses are superior to dull matter. The mind is higher than the senses. So I'm an animated, moving, living being, and my senses are pulling me in different directions. But the mind has the power to guide my senses and accept things as good or bad. That there are things that my senses want, but my mind has the ability to attach itself or detach itself from something. And my mind is a higher element than my gross physical senses. But the intelligence, he says, is still higher than the mind. So the intelligence is that overriding factor that can say, yeah, I know this feels good, but it's not actually good for you. I know this feels uncomfortable, but it's actually really good for you. And this sharpening sense of intelligence, this superior discrimination, not discrimination in the sense of, discrimination can be very, very negative word, but I would say discretion. Discrimination in the sense of discretion. Discernment. I won't use the word discrimination. I'll use discernment. The idea of discernment, not discrimination against like us versus them, but discernment in terms of like what is healthy and what is unhealthy. What is uplifting and what is degrading. What's a ripe avocado and what's an over. Ever get to like ever walk into a grocery store and it's like avocados 8 for $2 and you're like, that's amazing. And you go and you touch the first one, it just like implodes in your hand. You're like, these avocados are all mushy. Like how you even planning to sell these things? You know, you shouldn't discriminate, Prabhu. You should just accept the avocados for who they are. Yeah, but I can't use these for anything. Yeah, you shouldn't notice difference between avocados. Yeah, this avocado is so mushy. I can't eat it. I can't. And so we discern. There is discernment between which avocados are ripe, which things like this avocado is hard as a rock. Eat it. It's gonna give me indigestion. Eat it. We have to discern what are the ripe avocados, overly ripe avocados, and just right avocados. So the idea of using our intelligence, my intelligence to recognize, you know what, this is an easy button, but is this really what I need right now? Isn't that a great question? Is this really what I need right now? The intelligence, the mind, knowing that the intelligence influences the mind, that my mind gets conditioned through repetition. The mind gets conditioned through repetition, and therefore we have to be very careful what we do day in and day out, because every action is creating a pattern in the mind that becomes a habit, that becomes our nature, that becomes a path that leads to our destiny. And so when we make that one little step a day to turn towards spirit, to turn towards higher truth, to turn towards higher refuge, it's not just that one moment decision that you're making. You're actually rewiring the way the mind and heart and brain works to create new neural pathways that bring us to a new destination. So the intelligence is asking the question, is this really what I need right now? The mind can be conditioned through the acts of the intelligence to create new conditionings that lead us to new neural pathways, that lead us to new destinations. And a faith, a confidence. Faith is not just something that you just choose to have blindly, but faith is built off of lived experience. Faith is something that we build based off of our lived experience. And so we build the muscle of faith every day through small actions of courage. And in that way, when one's intelligence, mind, faith, and refuge, that's the process of taking shelter, being fixed in that supreme. And when we do that, we become fully cleansed of misgivings through complete knowledge, because now I'm in a place of clarity and I can proceed straight on the path of liberation. So that's the context of why we're here, why Spirit Matters exists, and why I'm so glad that you're participating in this with us, and why we read the Bhagavad Gita every day, and why it's important for you to read the Bhagavad Gita every day, and for us to read it together as a spiritual family across the globe. And we've been in the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, which is called Jnana Yoga, or transcendental knowledge. And we've been reading about the ideas of karma and akarma and vikarma, different types of action, and wanting to liberate ourselves from the binding reactions of karma. And we don't do that by becoming inert and just running away from life's problems, which is what an option Arjuna was presenting forward when the battle, the Bhagavad Gita, was about to take place. But we do it by letting go of the sense of proprietorship that we assume in life. Things belong to me. I, me, and mine. There's a beautiful, beautiful Sanskrit recitation that is often made when sacrifices are being performed. Idam Krishnaya idam namama. This is for Krishna. This is not for me. And so much of the ritual of spiritual life, like we have an arati ceremony where we're offering incense and flowers and water and ghee lamps of fire, and we're offering these various elements of the earth, or when we offer our food. It's such a beautiful ritual where you cook a meal and then you put it on a little plate and you place it on an altar and you say a prayer and you say, this is for you, Christian, this is not for me. And it puts us in that mindset of servitorship, of offering, of taking ourselves out of the center. Idam Krishnaya idam namama. This is for you, Krishna. This is for you, higher spirit. This is not about me. And we get such a relief, such an overwhelming relief when it's just like, it's just not about me. I'm just here to serve the center, not to be the center. And that relieves us from the bondage and reactions of karma. And then we can be in this world, but not of this world. And that's why Krishna says to catch us up with the verses we've been reading. Krishna says it's tricky. It's very tricky. The intricacies of karma are very hard to understand, he says in verse 17 of the 4th chapter. Therefore, you should know properly what action is karma, what forbidden action is vikarma, and what inaction is akarma. Inaction or akarma is not what we think it is in the sense of not acting, not doing anything in the world. But it's that being in the world but not being of it by releasing the sense of proprietorship. And how hard is that? How simple is that, but how hard is that? And that's why Krishna says later on in the Bhagavad Gita, throughout chapters 7 and 9 and 10, he talks about the ways in which, in chapter 15, verse 15, chapter 15, Krishna says, Sarvasya chaham hridisani vishto matasmritir jnanam bohanam cha, that I am the source of knowledge, remembrance, and forgetfulness. When he mentions in the 7th chapter that I am the ability of people, I am the strength of the strong, and the intelligence of the intelligent, the prowess of all powerful people. That when we do something wonderful, do we think that I did it on my own, or we recognize I was empowered to do something wonderful? How amazing is that? And I so easily could have messed all that up. By the grace of God, somehow things came together. And when things don't come together, by the grace of God, I'm still here. And I'm being shown that what I thought was so important really isn't that important. When life falls apart and things don't go our way, it is an opportunity for us to let go of the idea of what we thought was so important. So Krishna says it's very tricky to understand what action is, what karma is, what akarma is, and what vikarma is. Vikarma are those things which should never be done. Because he's talking about the idea that what creates bondage is not the action itself, but the consciousness with which we bring into the action. But don't be fooled. There are some things that no matter what consciousness you do it in, you should never do. And I don't think I need to give a list of those things for us to understand that there are some things which just you should never do. The inexcusables. So text 18, when he says, one who sees inaction or akarma in action, and action and inaction is intelligent among people and is in the transcendental position, although engaged in all sorts of activities, being in the world but not of it. Text 19, one is understood to be in full knowledge, whose every endeavor is devoid of desire for sense gratification. So there it is, that sense of that this is not meant to put me in the center, is devoid of desire for sense gratification. Because what happens, Krishna says earlier on in the 2nd chapter of the Gita, Krishna talks about the cycle of desire, the downfall of the end of the thread of attachment. He mentions, this is in chapter 2, I'm looking it up, verse 50, I'm here at verse 60. He says the senses are so here we go. Let's go back one more. Let's go back a couple verses. Okay, I'm going back and back and back. I'm in the second chapter, verse 58. Krishna says, one who is able to withdraw their senses from the sense objects, as a tortoise withdraws its limb within the shell, is firmly fixed in perfect consciousness. He's talking about sense control, self-control. That when there's a provoking situation, when there's something that just is like urging me to lunge forward, I'm able to find stillness and peace and withdraw myself before doing something that I know I'll regret. Okay. Text 59, though the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment. Okay, now we're talking about this idea of restraining ourselves, of having sense control. But he says the taste for that sense object may still remain. So he's saying that you may physically restrain yourself from certain situations, but your mind is going cuckoo. And your mind is still very absorbed in that thing that you're trying to hold back from. We call that resentment sometimes. Which resentment literally means resentio, re-feeling something, holding on to something, re-experiencing something again and again, a mental obsession. But he says, but ceasing such engagements by experiencing a higher taste, they're fixed in consciousness. Again, that higher taste, that higher refuge, that higher sense of shelter. We could become fixed in consciousness. And then he says, the senses are so strong and impetuous, O Arjuna, that they forcibly carry away the mind, even of a person of discrimination who's endeavoring to control them. The senses are very, 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 very strong. Therefore, we have to be very, 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 very careful about how we condition ourselves, because every action is not just an isolated incident, but it's the building of habits. There's that book by, I think it's Justin Clear, who wrote Atomic Habits. You don't make sweeping changes in your life all at once, but it's by small micro steps that build habits over time. And we think of building habits intentionally, but most of our habits have not been built intentionally. Most of our habits get built unintentionally through the unconscious actions that we perform every day. And all of a sudden, I've just built a habit of whatever it may be. Drinking first thing in the morning, going to bed late, speaking negatively of other people. How many of us have a habit of just gossiping? We get in a car with somebody else, we immediately be like, "Whoa, how's so-and-so doing? Did you hear about so-and-so?" And we just immediately just start, it's just a habit. It's hard for me to just talk about how I'm doing or ask another person how they're doing and get into a conversation just between us, connection between us. I got to bring in other people into the conversation and talk about other people's lives. Everything we watch and consume is just really, when you think about it, it's just just talking about other people. The news, what's going on in other people's lives. TV shows, what's going on in other people's lives. Social media, what's going on in other people's lives. It's just so much of it. How many of us have a condition to speak negatively of other people? So those senses are so strong and impetuous that they can carry away the mind, even of a person who's determining to control them. So we have to be careful. In verse 61, he writes in chapter 2, one who restrains the senses, keeping them under full control and fixes the consciousness upon me is known as a person of steady intelligence. And then he gets to, and this is what I wanted to talk about, when contemplating the objects of the senses, meaning it just begins with a mental contemplation, a mental musing, a person develops attachment for them. Now I've become a little bit of an obsession, a little bit of a sense. I'm thinking about it over. How many of us are careful to guard our thoughts? It's just a thought. I haven't done anything. Yeah, but that thought is going to lead to an action because it's going to create an obsession in the mind that is going to dictate your behavior. So when we just start to contemplate things in the mind, careful, cut it off, draw a hard line. Be careful about what you allow your mind to dwell on. A person develops attachment for them. And from such attachment, lust develops. The word kama and avarice and greed and intensity. I have to have it. Ever get so locked into having to have something? It doesn't even make sense. It's not like I need this for any particular reason of survival, but it's become an obsession and I'm locked into it. And from that lust, anger arises. Why anger? Because I've tricked myself and convinced myself into thinking I have to have something. And now my sense of peace and happiness no longer belongs to me. Why? Because it belongs to the outcome of the situation, which I never have control of in the first place. I have to have something. I may or may not get it. Or I get it, it's not what I wanted it to be. Or I get it and it gets taken away. And now I'm anxiety because I always got to keep it and I got to preserve it. When we become under the grip of our desire that convinces us that we have to have something in order to be happy, it's a losing game. It is a losing game. And therefore, Krishna mentions that one is understood to be in full knowledge. And back to the 4th chapter here, reading from verse 19, chapter 4. One is understood to be in full knowledge, whose every endeavor is devoid of desire for sense gratification. Not because it's some like self-deprecating, denial, but it's like, no, I have wisdom. I have knowledge to understand that that's a losing game. And so much of what we realize, we read in the beginning, when we read from the verse from the 5th chapter about taking refuge in a higher place, seeking higher shelter. Krishna talking about in the 2nd chapter that one who keeps their senses under control by fixing their consciousness upon me. He's not saying it's not complete self-denial. It's higher self-realization. And higher self-realization requires us to stop playing around with the games of our ego. And that person, Krishna says, is said by sages to be a worker for whom the reactions of karma have been burned up by the fire of perfect knowledge. Abandoning all attachment to the results of their activities, chapter 4, verse 20, ever satisfied and independent, they perform no fruit of action, although engaged in all kinds of undertakings. So I'm in the world, but I'm not of it. What does that mean? It means that I don't hold on to a sense of proprietorship. Not because I'm just denying self and I have this like low sense of self-esteem, because I have a higher sense of self-realization of who I am in relation to a higher power. And my refuge is not in trying to feed my ego and give everything to me, but it's in unloading the burden of the ego by giving everything to spirit, by giving everything to source, by giving everything to Krishna and taking that refuge. Such a person, we'll read this last verse, chapter 4, verse 21. Such a person of understanding acts with mind and intelligence perfectly controlled, gives up all sense of proprietorship over their possessions, and acts only for the bare necessities of life. Meaning, do what you got to do. It's interesting, like we have the prayer in the Bible, give us this day our daily bread. It's the same concept. Like, God, I'm turning to you. Provide for me what I need. I'm not going to over endeavor, but I do have my necessities. I do have my needs, my basic needs for survival and for comfort. And that's different for all of us. We have to determine what is the baseline of comfort and satisfaction I need in my life. Okay, get that, be comfortable, do that, but don't over obsess to the point of anxiety and despair. So you give up all sense of propriety for possessions and act for the bare necessities of life, to be comfortable and satisfied. And thus working, they're not affected by the lower reactions of karma. Okay. I think that's all we got. We're going to take this time, turn it over to Kimberly. What kind of takeaways you got for us? We got a lot of beautiful things in the chat. I got an avocado emoji. That's nice. Thank you. Being the center of the universe is a lot of work. Yes, Paul David, it's very true. And it's very exhausting. So much exhausting things and actions and thoughts. Whew, yes. Sydney says, very hard, especially when having health issues. Really need to hear this today. Thank you. Thank you. Breaking the habit of grumbling. It deeply ingratiated being poor training in my early years. I hear you. I'm a grumbler. I'm good at it. I'm really good at it. It's a hard habit to break. And there's a lot more that can be said on that. Maybe we'll pick it up next week. Kimberly, what kind of takeaways you got for us, Kimberly? If you're taking notes or just want something, if you couldn't make anything out of anything that I said, if it was just a jumbled mess, Kimberly performs a wonderful service of gathering it all and putting it into a few cohesive sentences or phrases so you can take away something. So what do you got for us, Kimberly?
All right. Resist the easy button. Rewire the mind to contact spirit through sound vibration. When life gets hard, find shelter by leaning into truth. Discern the avocados. The muscle of faith is built through small actions of courage. And this is not for us, this is for Krishna.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for these beautiful takeaways. And what I'm walking away with today, moving forward, is just rethink where I go to for comfort and shelter. Just do a little bit of an experiment and just bring more spirit into my life. So thank you all for giving me that opportunity. Thank you all so much for being here. Please tune in next week. We're going to start inviting more guests onto the show. We're going to start inviting more guests onto the show to be with us. I've been flying solo just because I've been traveling and in and out of short weeks and mid weeks and partial weeks. But I got some great guests lined up for us over the next couple weeks. And so, but none of them are confirmed specifically for any specific days. So I'm not going to announce them yet. So it might just be me again next week. But anyways, I love being with you guys. I'm super grateful for you. If you haven't already, please go rate and review this podcast, Apple Podcast, Spotify, wherever you listen. If you have any questions you'd like to ask or address on the show, or feedback, please write to us at spiritmatters@bhakticenter.org. And please check out bhakticenter.org to just look at the other cool events and trainings and courses and workshops and retreats that we got planned going on for you. And till then, be well, take care. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.